Everyone, so we just got an absolutely insane One Piece chapter, potentially the chapter that ended the entire Egghead arc. At the very least, we're probably going to get 1 or 2 chapters maybe, but it does seem like the primary conflict, which was against the Gorosei, just got resolved by Joy Boy of all people. This feels like a bit of a callback to me to Zou, which was another arc where the character that kind of came in clutch to defeat the bad guys was one of Joy Boy's crew members. I think a lot of us view Zunisha as at least having been a comrade of Joy Boy, if not one of the former members of Joy Boy's crew, and Zou was the first arc where it kind of resolves without Luffy being the one to defeat the main bad guys, but rather this former member of Joy Boy's crew steps in to take care of Jack and the fleet there. Now here, it's a much more dire situation, with obviously the 5 Gorosei being the antagonist, and it seems as though the Stride crew is just outmatched and they can't fight them off. And this time yet again, Luffy is not the one to actually defeat the bad guys, it's Emeth, yet another member of Joy Boy's crew. Obviously with Emeth, because it's a much larger scale threat that he's up against, he has to call upon Joy Boy's own Haki to deal with the Gorosei, but I just think that's an interesting parallel considering Zunisha and Zou kicks off the whole versus 4 Yonko saga, and this incident with Emeth at Egghead Island saving the day that's coming at the start of the final saga. There's even some alliteration with Zunisha and Zou and Emeth and Egghead. I don't know, just thought that's fun to mention. But I do like how Oda started both sagas in that manner, without Luffy necessarily getting some all-out extended battle, but rather, these are the warm-up arcs for the sagas, right? They're setting up what the general storyline is going to be for those sagas. So in Zou, it was establishing, look, we need the road poneglyphs, we're going to need to take out Kaido and Big Mom, this is our next steps. With the final saga, it's all about Vegapunk's big speech breaking down, here's the conflict of the world, here's what everybody's going to be after. It's not about road poneglyphs anymore, everybody's going after the One Piece itself. So at the end of the day, while Egghead was a much longer arc than Zou, it still paralleled the Zou arc in many ways. And it still serves as just a starting warm-up arc for the Straw Hats. Nobody got a true, long, extended, high difficulty fight. Luffy versus Kizaru, I guess you could say, is the closest thing we got to that, but even that was just a few chapters happening in the background of things, and once Luffy got serious, he handled it pretty quickly. Now, I'm not going to write off the Egghead Island arc just yet, since we still have a few hanging threads to see what's going to happen with Kuma, what's going to happen with Saturn. There's a very interesting point that one of my patrons mentioned regarding Saturn that I will talk about at the end of this video. But before we get into that, let's just talk about Joy Boy's moment in this chapter itself. This was undoubtedly the most impressive display of Haki ever in One Piece, and it's really not even close. It wasn't just the visual scale of what Joy Boy's Haki release looked like, it was the actual effect, which is just releasing that Haki basically took out 4 Gorosei. It didn't knock them out, because it would be kind of insane for a basic Haki release at this point to straight up knock out 4 characters who are arguably Admiral level or higher, depending on which Gorosei you're talking about. That's just not doable. Nobody's knocking out those level characters with just Conqueror's Haki, but the fact that the force of the Conqueror's Haki was so strong that it actually forced the Gorosei to revert back to their original forms and even basically sent them packing back home, that is insane. For Joy Boy to be so powerful that just storing up some of his Haki to be released by another character somewhere else could be considered like a ace in the hole weapon, like a super powerful weapon that can basically guarantee you a victory in battle. That is just unprecedented in One Piece. There's nobody in One Piece that's on that level that we've seen so far. The only character that might be on Joy Boy's tier is Imu, and based on Imu's terrified reaction by the end of the chapter, I'm putting my money on Joy Boy over Imu, guaranteed. And I think we do have a very clear idea shaping up of just how strong Joy Boy was and what it actually took to defeat him, which I'll be getting into in next week's video, so watch out for that, because I do feel like this chapter kind of cements Joy Boy as basically the strongest One Piece character to have ever existed. So that scene, that display of Haki, just insanely hype. I think lots of times we kind of have expectations of how strong, what the ceiling of power in One Piece can kind of look like, and then Oda very often just tops that. Like, I remember it would have been absurd at some point to talk about, Luffy easily handling 2 Admiral level opponents at the same time, but he essentially did that this arc against Kizaru and Saturn, and then it turns out that even Luffy has got a long way to go before he's keeping up with the likes of Joy Boy, his predecessor. So just how strong you can get in One Piece, Oda keeps sort of raising the roof to higher and higher levels, which is just really exciting and what you want to keep seeing in the final saga, because we want to feel like Luffy still has a ways to go. Like, the Luffy that we saw this arc, as strong as he is and as well as he was doing against Kizaru and Saturn early on, we saw that even with the help of Dorian Brogy, he couldn't really do anything to War Kiri, he had to run away. So there's still so much room to grow considering what Joy Boy was able to do with his Haki release compared to where Luffy's at right now and the struggles that he still faces against certain opponents. Now, as for what we got to see between Joy Boy and Emeth, that scene was very, very interesting because it suggests to me that there is a ton of potential for a lot of character writing in the actual Void Century flashback. Because it seems as though Emeth has his own sort of tragic history to him. It seems as though there is a storyline to Emeth himself, which means that if we're gonna be getting focus on individual characters throughout the Void Century flashback, like not just on Joy Boy, but many of Joy Boy's crewmates, that's shaping up the entire Void Century flashback to be something much more robust than we might have imagined. It might be similar to what I kinda hoped that Oden and Oden Scabbard's flashback would be like, because while Oden's backstory was fairly long, a good chunk of that had nothing to do with Oden and Wano, but rather was Oden's adventures outside Wano, and then getting to Whitebeard and Roger and Laugh-Tale and things like that. The amount of time that we actually spent with focusing on Oden and his Scabbards and that dynamic, it was a few chapters at most, and really we sped through a montage of how Oden met most of the Scabbards and what their stories were, and then just kind of rushed to the end. I feel like we're set to get something much, much more meaningful when it comes to Joy Boy and his crew members, which I think is very important because that sort of intentional character focus that really helps develop emotional investment and makes us feel things and gives a greater sense of tragedy as the events of the Void Century go down and Joy Boy and his crew ultimately are defeated. Some interesting things that viewers from my stream pointed out was that Emeth has an X very similar to the Straw Hat's X from Alabasta on his arm. So there could be some interesting parallels that Oda's setting up there. Maybe there was a reason that Joy Boy's crew, similar to Luffy, had to put X's on their arms, and that further cements the parallels between the storylines of these two crews set 800 years apart. There was also one very, very important fact that was seemingly established this chapter, which is that Joy Boy and Luffy are truly, truly, truly two distinct individuals, because with so much talk about how Luffy is the next Joy Boy, the new Joy Boy, and the term Joy Boy just being used over and over again to refer to Luffy, with Zunisha even saying that Joy Boy has awakened, we always believe for the most part that Luffy is not some reincarnation, that would kind of tarnish the idea of inherited will in One Piece if it's just, you just die and get reincarnated down the line. While that would tarnish that idea, it did start to feel as though it would be very, very nice if we got some just some confirmation that Luffy is not literally Joy Boy, but rather he is the inheritor of Joy Boy's will and likely is very similar to Joy Boy in many, many ways. I believe that this chapter gave us that confirmation with Emeth realizing that Luffy is not literally Joy Boy, he's just very, very similar, which is basically what I kind of like and hope for. People have seen similarities between Luffy and Roger before as well. I think Luffy and Joy Boy might be an even tighter similarity when it comes down to visuals and appearance, but that would make a lot of sense if maybe Joy Boy is part of the Monkey D lineage, because if you want to draw visual similarities, well, Luffy as a child looks very similar to Garp as a child, and when we've seen depictions of Luffy as a 40-year-old, it looks very similar to Garp in his middle-aged years. And ultimately, if the Nika fruit chose Luffy because out of the 800 years following Joy Boy, Luffy turned out to be the descendant of the Monkey D lineage that was the most similar to Joy Boy in that entire time span, then it would make a lot of sense that of course Luffy's gonna be very similar to Joy Boy because it's not a random coincidence, the fruit picked him for that very reason. So I like that confirmation. Now next week we have a break week, so in next Monday's stream we are going to be doing a predictions competition to see who can best predict what will happen in chapter 1123, and the winners as usual will be made moderators and will be shouted out in the following week's chapter review, and basically permanently join this channel's ongoing winner board. So make sure to tune into that next Monday, and there is one extremely interesting point that one of my patrons mentioned regarding the Saturn situation and why Saturn and only Saturn was left behind, and how that leaves the door open to one very, very interesting plot development at Egghead Island. So let's get to the voice of the people, which is the submissions from my top tier of patrons. So Sunnyclip said that Saturn is separated from all of the Gorosei now, so the moment where he could be knocked off to potentially be replaced by Devon is in motion. Also interesting that I guess since Saturn sailed to Egghead, he wasn't called back to Marijua. So Sunnyclip, that is a phenomenal point, because when Devon took Saturn's appearance, I dropped a whole video talking about how this plays perfectly into Blackbeard's long-term plan and how he can sort of use Devon to infiltrate the ranks of the Gorosei and get him to the next step of his plan, which you guys can watch that, Blackbeard's plan on how to take over the world. But The big question that viewers had was, how would this replacement, how would this swap actually take place? I mean, when could there possibly be a window in this Egghead Island battle where all the Gorosei are involved for Devon to just casually swap places with Saturn? It would likely have required Saturn to have been defeated off-screen where the Gorosei couldn't see him, and then Devon be able to swap in and take his spot, but it just seemed like too specific of a situation to see coming at any point. But just like that, the answer has been presented to us. It's just Saturn left at Egghead Island. Everybody else has been sent home. All the Gorosei are gone, Marines are off the island, Straw Hats are out of there. The ideal scenario, the scenario that seemed too difficult to imagine, it's just popped up out of the blue and it feels totally organic. It doesn't feel contrived at all. The whole situation makes total sense. Saturn wasn't magically summoned to Egghead Island. He sailed there by ship. The rest of the Gorosei, of course, still got teleported back home, and Saturn is the one who ordered all of the Marines off the island so that he could finish out the fight with the other Gorosei. But now the Gorosei are gone, it's just him left. It makes total sense that this is the opportunity where if somebody could knock off a Gorosei and take their spot, it's here. When there's a Gorosei out there in the middle of the ocean, stranded and alone, there are Marine ships around there, but there's enough time for the Blackbeard pirates to take advantage of the situation and take out Saturn. The question is, how are they going to do it? Because Saturn does seem to be impervious to pretty much all forms of damage. Even Luffy and Bonnie's Gatling didn't really do anything to him in the long run. That being said, I like to believe that the Blackbeard pirates have something up their sleeve to make this happen, because this scenario that Oda set up, it just seems too perfect for nothing to come out of it. I mean, if the Blackbeard pirates don't replace Saturn right now, I can't imagine at what point in the story they would get another opportunity like this. So Sunnyclip, that is a fantastic point. I do believe that is something that we will see in the next chapter or two, with that being one of the last concluding moments of Egghead Island. So that's a really, really exciting plot development to see just nice and neatly sort of just click into place. Beautifully done by Oda. So with that, I'm looking forward to next chapter, and if you want to get in your predictions for next chapter 1123 during next week's break, join in for the Monday stream so that you can compete to see if you get your prediction correct. And with that, I'll talk to you all next week.